Hi, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So, I am doing a recording on how to retain talent in firms. And I want to first and foremost thank James of College of Law and also for the Law Society of having me. I guess there are some top priorities which I think a lot of firms would be very, very much aware of. And I guess you as candidates or you as um, lawyers, partners, in the HR professional, that'd be interested to know what's important. For example, remuneration, good working environment, flexible hours, and all of that. But I get from me as a litigator, I see it from the other side of the fence, and where I work with other lawyers and individuals, and particularly because I wear another hat alongside being a lawyer, which is as a coach, and I tend to work with the individual and what matters to the individual. So I think that the way I'd like to do this presentation is to inverse it slightly, whereas law firms will mostly, tell you what's on the outside, the outward benefits, and all of that. I'd like to look more inwardly as an individual, what's important to you. And so by default, by consequence, you will then come to realize what's important to you, to then realizing, what makes you feel most at home, and therefore hence would want to make you stay, as opposed to other way around, where the benefits, I think there are actually studies done in terms of the concept of happiness. In America, I think if it's over, I think it's about 60,000, is it something like that? More than that, anyone's not necessarily going to be happier. So when we look at that stat and then we look at, the small, medium-sized firms, even the larger firms, what they're offering, in the millions even, it's not necessarily a direct consequence of one's happiness. Of course, it's a very philosophical debate. Some people, the more the merrier. For some people, the more doesn't equate to happier. It just means more work. Which in of itself is, of course, very important as well in terms of good, valuable work. But I suppose I can share maybe from in a way, I can only really speak of my own experience in working with small firms, medium firms, and large firms, and how, as a consequence, as an individual, how that, in my own experience, made me feel. And then maybe you can also try and see and translate that in terms of what it does for you. So, for example, I started off in a very small set. It was diverse. It was a wonderful experience in the sense of we had very close colleagues to work with. And as my practice grew, I also worked with very big firms, international firms. And of course, it's always about the individuals, for me at least, that no matter how big the firm, how small the firm, you are going to end up working with individuals that you would like. It's a very funny concept because nobody goes out there and says, right, how are you going to look for the best counsel? How are you going to look for the best colleagues? Is to go out and look for people with the highest qualifications, with similar backgrounds, and with the top grades. In fact, it doesn't actually work like that. From my personal experience, it's regardless actually of those backgrounds that you end up finding people that you would like to work with. So I've been in very interesting and fortunate situations where I've had to look. I had a potential class action case, where there were over, at that time, about 500 claimants from China in an investment case. And I was actually tasked to, you could say, project manage this case. From a firm in China, it was a medium-sized firm, and lo and behold, there was me in London. And when they spoke to me about this case, I actually said to them, do you know I'm only one individual? I would actually need to go out and look for a team of lawyers in London, short of actually hiring a firm, or short of actually hiring me and others in China to actually work on this case. So what was very interesting for me was I then went out to look for potential Queen's Counsel at the time, to potentially look for a law firm I could work with. But because of how I was trained and how I was used to, I actually valued working with individuals who was, of course, high caliber, who was able to provide me with strategy, but were able to then give me the sort of meat on the bones, as it were, for this particular case. So in the end, what I did was I went to a small medium set whom I'd previously worked with and did my mini pupillage with. I'd worked with their senior junior there, who was actually a fraud specialist, to sort of hatch up a plan, as it were, to how to tackle this case. It was the most unusual, and it was definitely premature for me, because it started way sooner than I had ever anticipated. But I guess that's the joys of work. You can never say never when it comes to the kind of area of law, the complexity, and the kind of people you will work with. Lo and behold, I then, after a few years of practice, and London was very much bread and butter, I then had the chance to go to Dubai. And Dubai, for me, was one of the best places, and still is, where I had to push myself to see how far I could go in terms of my own performance. And there, one of the first cases I was given was a super yacht, frantic super yacht case. And it was one of the most interesting cases because it was pretty much what we've been trained for, David and Goliath. It wasn't necessarily that I had to choose my colleagues. It was more that I had to work with very smart minds, very intelligent people. And you see, as lawyers, we also come with a problem. How many lawyers does it take to change a light bulb? Probably more than 6, right? And a similar concept, the idea of, too many chefs in the kitchen. What I found really interesting over my time in practice is fewer lawyers in a room usually works more efficiently. If you're going to have lots of people in a room, you're probably much better in an in-house counsel scenario, which I've had the good fortune to work with and as, because generally, contrary to what people think, when you have too many lawyers in a room, that people tend to feel a little bit, not intimidated, but a bit shy, I think, in sharing what they really think, because imagine, lo and behold, you've got so many smart people in the room. When you're in an in-house counsel scenario where you're the only lawyer, if not you're the one or two lawyers of a room of many, many business people, they're all dying to hear what you think. So I think it then becomes a scenario where not only are they dying to hear what you think, but they're also very appreciative with the thoughts and ideas that you end up proposing, because it's a legal solution to their commercial problem. Whether they accept it or not is another story, which is another scenario. But the least of it is the least of your worry is that you don't have to start worrying about whether your solution is actually a good solution. And might I say, so that's the first scenario, right? Working with people, of high caliber in cases. The second scenario I want to give you is from perhaps a client's perspective, but also how, I guess it's also how one is trained. So for me, when I'm trained at the bar, it's to be fearless in advocating what our clients' needs are, of course, subject to our duty to the court and to the rule of law. So I had a scenario where back then, if you think back in, I think it was 2008, where there was a whole banking crisis and bank charges and whatnot, there was a lay client that came to me that had, which I at that time didn't know, already sought a legal advice on whether they were able to redeem their banking charges. And the first counsel they approached said no. Lo and behold, I didn't know what the first counsel had written, but I looked through their papers and I thought, do you know what? I think we do have a chance. So there we go, we drafted an opinion, my case with those instructing me. And the good news was we got our money back, and of course everything else is history. We all know that in the end, banks were overcharging for these surplus charges, insurance, third-party insurances, which they then had to cough up. So what taught me then afterwards was the first opinion that you get, pretty much like a doctor's opinion, is purely that. If you were keen to seek a second opinion, you're entitled to, given that you have good reason for it, and not that it's frivolous, that in the sense that you're just doing forum shopping, to find the best counsel opinion that would best suit your scenario. But more the opposite, that it really reinforces the thought that you had about your case, which is that you are entitled to what you thought you were entitled to. And last but not least, I want to talk a bit more on a personal note, and I have sent a second video in relation to the personal side of things, is, have you ever read the book, What Colour Is Your Parachute? Because if you haven't, I highly encourage it. It focuses more on the individual and the kind of environment that suits you. I would say that as individuals and at the bar, at least how I started, I thought I'd be pretty much like a cookie cutter sort of a lawyer. I trained bar, went to law school, did the traditional training, went through the hoops. But what I discovered that it's actually only suffice, or it would only do you so good to a certain point. And I want to quote a master that I studied under, and he's not a lawyer, but he's a metaphysics, and actually he's a wonderful speaker, mentor that I totally admire. Tony Robbins. Some of you are going to love him, some of you are going to hate him, but he says, something along the lines of, if you want an outrageous outcome, a spectacular outcome, then you've got to do spectacular things. And I think that is so true. I think in life, if you want to be your ordinary advocate, then by all means do everything ordinary. Go to the top schools, get great results, fight your court cases and try to win them, by all means. But it's going to take you that little more oomph if you want to be that much more outstanding. And I guess for me, that turning point for me was when I reached my own crisis point of the ceiling, but an invisible ceiling of, is this it? At that time, I was in London. I was fighting high court cases, even Court of Appeal. I was working around the clock, in chambers mostly. And I had to ask myself, well, I could possibly do this for the rest of my life, or I could try my hand at something different. And it was at that turning point, and it was actually really pivotal for me in my career, because it really opened up my world as an advocate, as a lawyer, as an individual. I ended up accepting an opportunity to go on a program called Singularity University, and I went to then on study space engineering. And again, I would like to say everything else is history, in the sense that it opened my world, my whole new world of legal practice, but in a totally different field. These are healthy bursts of exploration, which I encourage you all to try. And what is the key telling sign? Have you ever, when you were a kid, or even now, have this urge to do something, but you're so terribly scared to do so? It could be anything. It could be from playing the violin, singing, writing poetry. You have something that you are talented in, I would say, or naturally have an inclination for. But for some reason, because of your societal expectations, or because of, what the world expects of you, you either don't have time, you don't make time for it, or you're too scared. You think you're not that great at it, and hardly think you've got a chance. Well, let me tell you, this is your calling that probably only you, and let's just say God and the universe, knows you're anything good at it. And until you take the courage to go on that stage and perform, it will never come out. What am I trying to say? As a lawyer, as an individual, and this is what I flipped to my second hat with my startup Newspaper 2060, where I do some coaching, is we've got to really face the very thing that we're very much scared of, and allow ourselves to be in that position to show who we really are. Because half the question of how do you retain talent, how do you, be the master of your own universe, as it were, is you've got to really understand who you are. And even for people who are in the leadership roles of trying to retain people, you only truly want to retain people who want to stay. It doesn't work, I can tell you this much, thinking, oh, if I just give them some material benefits, if I just, give them a cushier seat on the table. Yes, those things matter to a certain extent, but it's not going to get people to really, genuinely want to be in this environment if they're not, how shall I say? Imagine being a fish in a duck's body, or a duck being in a sheep's farm. I mean, you get what I'm trying to say. For me, I discovered my passion was actually working with entrepreneurs, working with people who are passionate about entrepreneurship. Now, I'll give you a third limb of thought. Imagine back then, as a rookie lawyer, I was knocking on people's doors, and I gave myself 15 years. 7 years I did my law degree. Then the rest I was trying so hard. to cultivate the kind of client to work with. And what truly happened was, after 3 years of door knocking, as it were, I did end up having law firms coming knocking on my door. And the best example I could give you was, after a few years, I did end up going back to Australia, where I registered as a foreign registered lawyer. And I dreamed of a law firm, knocking on my door and saying, "Hey, Helen, we will pay you. We will pay you to come back to London to fight this court case." And it did happen. So I wanted to say, actually, as a thought, of all the big cases, the big clients, the multi-billion setups, as it were, I met those kind of clients once I start pursuing my passion of space. Think of all the crazy, investors. Think of all the crazy millionaires. Think of all the craziest of ideas. Well, lo and behold, it happened for me. So what am I trying to say is, when you level up, you take that courageous step and say, right, I am going to pursue what I am, well, I wasn't scared, but certainly I was interested and enthusiastic in. Naturally, the universe will bring those people into your life. And I guess the same thing for people who want to retain talent is, if you step up your game, right? You know how they say, if you want to be the thing that you want to be, then show up as that kind of a person. If you, and I think I'll end with a story, is when I was at law school, I used to dress up. And from time to time, I would dress up so nicely in a suit with a suitcase. People asked me, "Where are you going, Helen?" And I'd say, "I'm going to my law lecture." And I had a very interesting scenario even, which is true. I was in my first year of law, and before I became an international court judge, lawyer, asked me, "So which law firm do you work with?" And I said, "Look, I'm a first year law student." Sometimes in life, we're becoming something, or we are something. And I think for me, I guess, and I'm thinking particularly of people who are wanting to reach to a certain stage, is you've got to act as if you're already there. Love the things that you already have. Have the things that you already love, and you will get more of it. Thank you so much. I hope this helps you, motivates you, inspires you to go off and do the many things that you desire. And I look forward to speaking to you at the next opportunity. Thank you. Have a great day.